for the hardest-hitting show in talk radio. The true progressive voice since 2012. This is Southpaws.
And welcome to Southpaws on the Pacifica Radio Network. We are the leaders of the revolution. My name is Darren Gibson, and I'm your co-host.
And my name is Jack Prince, your fellow co-host.
Jack, we're going to do a little bit of something different today. Instead of going through topics of newsworthy items that are happening this week, we're going to go a little bit different direction here, which is something we rarely do on the show. But before we get started, a couple of reminders that you can follow us on social media by going to facebook.com/Southpaws Radio Show. You can follow us on Twitter at Southpaws Radio. You can become a patron of the show by going to patreon.com/Southpaws Radio. And you can always find our podcast on iTunes. Go to the iTunes store, search under podcast for Southpaws, find our logo, and you'll be all set. You can also find us at Spreaker.com as well, and you can listen to the shows there. Links to the shows are posted on our Facebook page, on our Twitter page, and on our YouTube page. So plenty of ways you can find us. And I don't know, we need to find ourselves, Jack.
Yeah.
I guess I'm speaking as society. I think we're in pretty good hands, but it's the rest of society that I'm just not really quite sure about. You know, we talked before we started recording. How do we get people to start becoming more, not even politically aware? Well, I guess that's the starting point. Because when you have political awareness, then you can find different causes to get involved in, marches that you can be a part of, protests you can be a part of, and you know, we're not seeing a lot of that. The Vietnam War. Jack, I was not alive during most of the Vietnam War, and toward the end, I was just a little kid. And actually, by the time that I started kindergarten, the war was pretty much over at that point. Mm-hmm. But in those days, in the late 60s, in the early 70s, protests over the Vietnam War, thousands and thousands of people, right?
Yep.
The civil rights marches in the 1960s. Mm-hmm. Again, thousands of people protesting. In Europe, we only have to take a look at France, the Yellow Vest protests. Thousands of people every Saturday.
For months.
For months and months and months.
Through the winter.
And we just recently had the May Day protests in France, where union officials, union workers, marched in the streets. Yellow Vest protesters joined them, protesting the policies of French President Macron. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There were 150 arrests made during that time. The cops used tear gas and everything else like they have for the last several months. Jack, why are we not seeing these type of protests here in the United States?
Darren, I concur, and I think the answer is multi-layered. But before we even tackle the answer, let's just talk about how bad it is, how the indications of apathetic citizenry are all around us. The France comparison is startling, but the Vietnam War one is maybe even more indicative. You have had United States at war for 18 years in a row as of today, maybe even longer. I'm pressing 20 years, the longest war in history. It's Orwell's eternal, perpetual war.
It was war with the same country.
Same country. I'm talking about Afghanistan.
Yes.
And there's been multiple wars. They may call them conflicts, but nonetheless, in that time period. I can't think of a large-scale anti-war protest for years. I can't remember, other than a few Code Pink people standing up occasionally, I mean, I was there. I saw the protests. I was down at Michigan State's campus and had a canister of tear gas bounce off the back of my head. I saw the students, girls, young kindergarten teachers, not crazy Antifas. We're talking, and not that Antifas crazy, but that's how they're labeled. These weren't extremists. Out in the streets on Grand River Avenue, protesting the Vietnam War. And I can't remember one really of any magnitude since. We've seen a few protests back. There were some gay rights protests. There was the whole disease, the
ERA protests in the 70s.
Yeah, but as far as the war protest, and we are spending trillions of dollars. The Pentagon has been caught with unexplained $21 trillion of money spent.
It's gone. It's vaporized.
It's just gone. Yeah. We hear atrocity after atrocity, like we shared about the GI, not a GI, an officer that took his hunting knife out and stabbed a 15-year-old kid in Iraq who wasn't a soldier. He was a citizen getting some medical treatment from our medic. And this guy lurched across the room and stabbed him right through the neck and then boasted about the kill he got with his hunting knife and said he was putting laughter in the word manslaughter, wrote it on walls across Iraq. Not one day, but for months. We hear these atrocities. We brought out and have brought out, we don't have time to list them. And yet, where is the pushback, Darren? Yeah, you asked for an answer. Here's one simple answer. And I think it's the fact that this society is completely controlled by a manipulative media. I heard the song just the other day from the 60s. Well, I even go back farther. Heard the song, "This Whole World Is Exploding." You're old enough to vote, or you're old enough to kill, but not for voting. The protest songs in the 60s that were on all of our minds in class, in school. The disallowance of that. The infiltration of the legislation that stopped the pictures of coffins coming back as they came back from Vietnam. That has been influential. You're not going to see the child that's naked, burning with napalm, that overnight turned the minds of, for most part, mainstream Americans. They weren't flaming liberals. They weren't out there, in a normal protest, but they saw that, and it says historically that their minds were turned, millions of people, because of that coverage. We don't get that coverage. We don't get that. There's a law against protest songs. You don't hear the mainstream media allow any protest songs. They can't play them.
No, you don't hear it. We're actually playing Barry Maguire's Eve of Destruction underneath as we're talking right now.
And then how about Fortunate Son? I ain't no fortunate son.
Yeah.
Talking about how the senators didn't send their sons over. You're not going to have that on mainstream media today. I mean, they can replay that in oldies.
Yeah.
But it's not going to derive from the milieu right now, the atmosphere we have. So we are controlled, and our thinking is controlled like never before. We have educational systems that aren't going to tell you of the atrocities, the war atrocities. They're not going to tell you of the union heads that were busted. The media, the school textbooks, we haven't got a chance because we're not getting accurate information. We're not seeing. We see a trickle. And I really wonder where the mothers and the Christian mothers are when they see pictures of these emaciated bodies over in Yemen. And then in the same page, you can see, you don't have to dig very hard. Or we're giving the Saudi Arabian government monies to attack these helpless people.
Well, here's the thing, is that you're not seeing those pictures here on American media.
You're not, no. You saw the child burning with napalm.
Yeah.
You're not seeing these children today.
No, because when people saw that picture of the naked child after having her clothes burned off of her from a napalm attack, that woke people up and said, hey, this is wrong. We can't be a part of this anymore.
Right. Yeah.
And you want to know why? I got my own little theories. I'll tell you why a little bit of it. Just a few years ago, who owned NBC? Just a few years ago.
General Electric. For a while.
What's one of General Electric's biggest money makers?
Sure.
Military.
Yes, it is.
Engines for jets. It's untold. It's untold, folks. I mean, you really have to take a look at everything. Carlin? Do we need to play Carlin? Who owns this country?
You got it.
I mean, it's just, you ought to know. Yeah, we haven't played this in a while, so let's see if I can find Mr. George Carlin here, because his words were absolutely prophetic, and I don't want that one. Although I should play that. I've also got the George Carlin, but we like war. We're a warlike people. That I think we should play too if we've got time. But Carlin had it right. Who owns this country? He's going to tell you.
There's a reason. There's a reason for this. There's a reason education sucks, and it's the same reason that it will never, ever, ever be fixed. It's never going to get any better. Don't look for it. Be happy with what you got. Because the owners of this country don't want that. I'm talking about the real owners now. The real owners, the big wealthy business interests that control things and make all the important decisions. Forget the politicians. The politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners. They own you. They own everything. They own all the important land. They own and control the corporations. They've long since bought and paid for the Senate, the Congress, the state houses, the city halls. They got the judges in their back pockets. And they own all the big media companies, so they control just about all of the news and information you get to hear. They got you by the balls. They spend billions of dollars every year lobbying to get what they want. Well, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else. But I'll tell you what they don't want. They don't want a population of citizens capable of critical thinking. They don't want well-informed, well-educated people capable of critical thinking. They're not interested in that. That doesn't help them. That's against their interest. That's right. They don't want people who are smart enough to sit around the kitchen table and figure out how badly they're getting f***ed by a system that threw them overboard 30 f***ing years ago. They don't want that. You know what they want? They want obedient workers. Obedient workers. People who are just smart enough to run the machines and do the paperwork, and just dumb enough to passively accept all these increasingly shittier jobs with the lower pay, the longer hours, the reduced benefits, the end of overtime, and the vanishing pension that disappears the minute you go to collect it. And now they're coming for your Social Security money. They want your fucking retirement money. They want it back, so they can give it to their criminal friends on Wall Street. And you know something? They'll get it. They'll get it all from you sooner or later, because they own this fucking place. It's a big club, and you ain't in it. You and I are not in the big club. And by the way, it's the same big club they use to beat you over the head with all day long, where they tell you what to believe. All day long, beating you over the head in their media, telling you what to believe, what to think, and what to buy. The table is tilted, folks. The game is rigged. And nobody seems to notice. Nobody seems to care. Good, honest, hard-working people, white collar, blue collar, doesn't matter what color shirt you have on. Good, honest, hard-working people continue. These are people of modest means. Continue to elect these rich suckers who don't give a about them. They don't give a about you. They don't give a about you. They don't care about you at all. At all. At all. Yeah. You know? And nobody seems to notice, nobody seems to care. That's what the owners count on, the fact that Americans will probably remain willfully ignorant of the big red, white, and blue that's being jammed up their assholes every day. Because the owners of this country know the truth. It's called the American dream, because you have to be asleep to believe it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there it is. I mean, this isn't all it is, but that's certainly part of it when Carlin can tell you that the media, this is a direct quote, you just heard it, the media tells you what to think. Mm-hmm. And you're not sophisticated to free yourself from it without a lot of work. Chomsky says you should struggle to find the truth because it's an ocean of fabrication, an ocean of propaganda, and you have got to work like mad to get the kernels of truth. And when you get them, you build them on one kernel and then another kernel. You are a victim of a purposeful onslaught of propaganda, one of which is scaring you. You need to give $700 billion to the military budget. Mm-hmm. We've been in war out of the last 300 years, every year somewhere, except for about 5 years.
It's more than that. It's about 16 or 18. I forget the actual number, but...
you're talking about those songs that we heard back in the 60s, that the younger generation would get into